right. Well, thanks for everybody who's here and enjoying this. Just so that people who don't know me, a quick background. I kind of come from three worlds: the brand development world, investment banking, and management consulting. So over the course of my career, I've been a founder, owner, operator, investor. And I'm a diehard New Yorker, but I am very loyal to Boston sports fans, and that's the way it's got to be. So my experience is pretty diverse. I have a lot of crossover skill sets from, brand creation and development, strategic planning, all levels of business positioning, integrated communications. As a founder of an investment bank, I did a lot of work with private equity and venture, mergers and acquisitions, investment placement, raising capital, have done chief brand officer roles. And so that eclectic mix of skills has really what founded BrandThink as a company that works with businesses to create value creation, scale, build intangible brand equity, and help them raise capital. So we had session one last month, and these three sessions are really interconnected because everything kind of relates to the other. So just as a quick recap, we talked really about what a brand is and what are the intangibles that collectively define what a brand is. All these things we kind of reviewed, the emotional, intangible side of attributes that define who you are and what you are and how people connect with you and have relationships with you. Intangible brand equity is really around these bulleted items: emotional connections, love, preference, loyalty, salience, all the things that connect with people on an emotional, spiritual level. This is not to discount the importance of features and benefits and having a solid product. I mean, nothing's going to kill a brand faster than a shitty product. So that's a given. But all the other things are the things that build long-term sustainable relationships and the things that are significantly connected to driving financial performance and asset value. So that's why this stuff becomes particularly important. So we talked a lot about the benefits, but for founders, strong brands reduce the cost of capital. It means you're going to limit your dilution and give up less equity. It improves transaction multiples. It lowers the risk profile in the eyes of investors and perceives the likelihood of future success, which is a key goodwill negotiating lever. And it's proven decade after decade to improve enterprise and shareholder value. So as a value creation strategy, it's a critical leg in the stool to achieve that. So today we're going to kick in and talk a little bit about how you build that brand equity, how that connects to value creation, and how that connects to leadership, and what is leadership's responsibility in making sure that happens. Today, I want you to keep in mind these two words: alignment and consistency, because these two words are critical if you're looking to translate building brand into financial value. Because building equity is a long game, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it happens through alignment across the enterprise and in the market, and consistent delivery of that over time. So these are the two operative words that underpin pretty much everything we're going to talk about today. So first, we'll try to clear up the difference between brand value and brand equity. Typically, in the financial modeling, brand value is something that can be put on a P&L and be measured. To some extent, it can have tangible financial value. But brand equity is primarily the intangibles of brand that cannot easily be measured. Accountants have struggled with this for decades. How do I quantify things like brand love and loyalty and advocacy and the things that creates long-term sustainable success? You can't really measure it, yet it's been proven statistically over many decades to dramatically increase market performance, enterprise value, and long-term success. So there's a conflict here where you can't easily measure it, but it's proven in the long term to provide financial value. So that sort of suggests that there's a philosophical element of understanding this stuff and believing in it if I can't necessarily measure it right off the bat. So really to build equity, you need to sort of be cognizant of a couple things. How are our memory systems retain information? How do we remember everything? Why is, when people say, well, a brand position needs to be single-minded, why is that so important? That's because our memories, our systems are only capable of retaining a certain amount of information. And if you're going to be consistent over time, you want to repeat something that is highly memorable. You have to understand how people make purchases. And that's a little bit about neuroscience and behavioral psychology. And at the end of the day, people make emotional decisions before they make rational decisions. They tend to choose with their heart and then justify those decisions on a rational basis. But it's pretty much proven that we first respond emotionally. So because this stuff is not easily measurable, understanding things start to define an operational philosophy, a leadership philosophy that needs to be pushed from the top down. It is not about spending incremental money to build brand. It's really about how you run your business. So things like values and authenticity become important in building relationships with your market. Building trust and loyalty all connect to lifetime value. Emotions build sustainable relationships, and at the end of the day, if you're people will choose to work with a brand that makes them feel better, even if feature sets necessarily are not as good as a competitive environment, and they will even not switch from a brand because that sense of loss of that relationship is greater. So you can't really underestimate the power of the emotional side. All these things inform decision-making for how leaders make business decisions. And anytime you can build that kind of emotional connection, that leads to preference, that leads to advocacy, all that connects to lifetime value. And obviously all these things directly connect to revenue. And that's really what this is all about. Cause and purpose has risen in importance over the years, primarily because younger generations are more concerned than older generations for aligning themselves with brands whose values they connect with. This is important to them. They want to know that they are aligning themselves with brands that have something that they do that's more important than just making money. They want that emotional attachment, that affinity. They want to see a demonstration and a commitment to values. And so it's very much about how a company behaves as much as anything else. These kinds of things are critical elements that also align your internal people, your employees, how you build culture inside your business, and the emotional connection that employees have with your business. By the way, feel free to interrupt anytime. I don't want to just sit here and do a monologue. If you have questions, you have feedback, thoughts, please, feel free to interrupt me and give me a break.
Understood.
Yep, and also if you have questions, we can just, as always, enter it in the chats. Feel free to. The goal will be, as we move this, we'll make it kind of that continued live conversation, and I'm sure we'll have. I have plenty of questions that I'll keep bringing up as well.
Yeah, no, it's always a little better if it's interactive instead of me just talking at everyone. So, but Ben Horowitz said it really well. And recent people remember how you make them feel. Maya Angelou made that quote memorable, but it's really true. Brands need to remember that they're not just selling a product or a service or features and benefits. They are selling a relationship. How you feel, how people feel is going to be a core driver to how they make purchase decisions. Part of this conversation is about how do I connect this intangible stuff to pragmatic value creation, scaling, business decisions. How do they all come together to create overall value? So it really starts with making sure that you have built a foundation for the brand and have defined the things that you can then be consistent with and aligned with so that you can be something over time and not change. So that's one of the keys to building equity is consistency over time. And if you be one thing for a year or 2 years and then you change your spots, you are diluting the equity that you've built and you basically end up starting over. But a solid brand foundation has clear positioning. It has defined purpose for the business. It defines mission, values, what are the core pillars that hold up that brand, what is my messaging architecture and prioritization in that messaging. Have I defined a brand's personality, its tone and manner? Do I have a manifesto or a narrative? How do I tell that story on a consumer-facing language? And until you've done those things, you don't really do brand guidelines like logos and colors and fonts. That's brand extension. That's not brand strategy. So that really comes later.
And so Lyle, I guess that, that's kind of been an ongoing question that we have from not even ourselves when we first even started Gilda, but to a lot of the other founders that are, whether it's service-based, B2C, B2B, right? Anything about that inevitable end product. But is there almost like, you kind of work through some of it with us too, but is there almost like a roadmap, right? And the idea that as we know on the product side, right, you need to be able to determine what's the pain point, right? What's the product itself? Who's your ICP? Who are you going to use that? And you kind of have that workflow with brand equity and with messaging. It kind of sounds like you described a little bit about that as well. Can you kind of highlight a little bit about, like, all right, as a, let's call it new founder, when do I do these steps?
The most important thing to remember with thinking about what is a brand foundation is one, it always starts with positioning. And we're going to go into that a little bit. And in session 3, we're actually going to go through the process of developing core positioning. But positioning really is what allows you to say, this is my audience, this is my market context, this is my core point of differentiation and the proof that I can deliver on that brand promise. That is a capitalistic endeavor. And even though it is directly connected to how you express your brand, it has to be grounded in capitalism because we're all in this to make money and sell something. So all these attributes, purpose, mission, values, they are not arbitrary things that you go, oh, well, I'm passionate about dogs, so my purpose is going to be dog shelters. All these things have to be directly connected to manipulating an audience. And I say that with love. I don't mean negatively manipulating, but they need to connect. If I have a purpose or values, those things need to align with who my core market is. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not aligning with the values of the people that I want to be my constituents. So these are not arbitrary decisions, although sometimes they get made arbitrarily, but that's because people haven't really thought about the importance of how these attributes are necessary for consistency and necessary to align with audiences that you want to build relationships with. So yeah, there is a linear process to this, Brian, and it really starts with establishing core positioning. That's where foundationally it all begins.
Great. Appreciate that. And I know at some point, are there any resources that you kind of recommend or that you have kind of even just like a one pager that shows, it's almost like the check mark.
Yeah,
right?
We'll do that in session 3. We're going to do that in detail in session 3.
Okay, great. Because I know that that'll be a helpful resource. I think that a lot of people will want to follow along with. So sounds great.
Absolutely. I will tell you though that it's not easy to do yourself, and Brian, that we've done it.
Right,
It really takes outside, unbiased support without any confirmation of category biases, because it is both a strategic and creative exercise, and it's really not easy to do yourself. It's tough when you're inside the bottle to read the label, as they say.
Of course.
And a perfect example of that was we were not really understanding what we even were at Gilder, like specifically, and Lyle sort of taught us. So yes, it's all good. Thank you.
So storytelling, why do people write manifestos or brand stories or narratives? Why do you take that brand foundation and then how do I tell a story? Because stories are, since the dawn of time, the things that have connected people, and storytelling is far more memorable than a bulleted list of features and benefits. It gets shared. It's just way people are wired. And if you want to build a connection with somebody, and you get on a one-on-one on a Zoom, you're not going to just say, hey, here's the stuff I sell. You're going to say, hey, where are you from? What sports team do you like? And you create a bond by telling stories with each other. So that's why that stuff becomes so important. It's how we are able to connect emotionally. All of this stuff, while it all is intangibles, remember there's data behind a lot of this stuff. 82% of people prefer brands whose values match their own. 75% have ceased purchasing from brands with conflicting values. And it can be even worse than that. You can get, abandoned people, boycotting Starbucks because they're pissed off at how the brand treated them. And consumers have tremendous power. And so if you're not thinking about that emotional side of your relationships, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. People will pay more for premium products. Why is Apple able to charge 35% more money for what is a commodity product that functions basically the exact same way? Because they have equity, brand equity. 66% of consumers seek out eco-friendly brands. This is especially true with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They're willing to pay more for things that connect with values, have sustainability features, or are green. And they're more connected to brands that and will increase their spending and over a competitor. So the financial payback for this stuff, while it's very hard to measure day in and day out on a P&L, are proven. So if I can't measure it day to day and I can't tell my CEO, here's my CFO, how this it becomes a operating philosophy, a best practice. And so leadership needs to understand this stuff to push this philosophical approach in how they run their business, because it matters. B2B, it's never been more important, B2B. The gray line between what's B2B and what's B2C is really blurred. But in a crowded marketplace where a lot of products, especially like in this AI services space where everything feels very commoditized, brands have never been more important. 5 times more likely to consider purchasing with a small brand. It's a huge difference. And everything we talked about the psychology of how people purchase, it's no different in the B2B space as it is in the B2C space. And years ago, people thought they didn't really need to create brand differentiation in the B2B side, but that's just absolutely not true. So we can take a pause here before we go into the next phase of this. Anybody have any thoughts or questions around this kind of stuff?
Yes. In hearing what you're talking about, like, it makes me think about how important consistency is in your branding, and that's a big trust factor there. I'm probably dating myself, but I think if anyone remembers New Coke, when Coca-Cola decided to rebrand, and all the consumers rebelled. So it just makes me think about consistency. There's certain things I might want to post, but I resist because it's not really relevant to the brand or it doesn't really help anybody. And so I hold back from posting something that just feels like kind of cool to post, maybe every once in a while, but the point being, like, be really cognizant of the consistency of the brand and how that resonates with the audience. So.
Yeah, it's a great point, Michael. Consistency is at the heart of all of this stuff. The way our memory systems work, if I toss 10 balls at you at the same time, you're really not going to catch any. But if I toss 2 at you, you're going to catch them. And we retain information the same way. And many neurosciences have proven that, the more something gets repeated consistently over time, the more it becomes truth. And frankly, and sometimes sadly, whether it's truth or not, it becomes truth. So, building brand is the same science. It's the same methodology. It's a frequency over time equation. That's how people buy media. Repeated exposure to the same message creates memorability. So that's why I threw those 2 words up at the beginning of this: alignment, right? Everybody's got to be singing from the same song sheet. Your employees got to get it. Middle management's got to get it. That's got to be pushed into the market. They've got to get it. And then it's all got to be consistent. And that's how you build equity. You have to stand for something and you have to put a stake in the ground and own it. That's hard for some businesses. Some businesses say, oh, I'm tired of my website. I'm tired of this. I'm going to change all my messaging. They tend to get sick of stuff way before their end audiences get sick of stuff. So.
Well, and that's a great, and sorry, I don't know if there's someone else with their hand raised. My immediate follow-up to that is, how do you know when, because I feel like I've talked to a lot of founders where, especially in not just in the tech and startup side, but, hey, I need to pivot my product. I need to pivot my ICP, right? And as a result, you're more than likely also having to pivot and update your messaging because it's going to be a different ICP. It's going to be a different product you're doing. So does that always go hand in hand? Or when you look at founders that more often than not are frequently pivoting, do you feel like that is the time where you also have to do your messaging in alignment? Or is there something where, okay, you're going to have to A/B test a few different things?
Well, if you work with a strategist to develop your positioning, then they're going to make sure that you have a positioning that is broad enough to allow for movement within the business. So messaging is hierarchical, right? So they're at the top of the messaging pyramid. Top of the hierarchy is really your positioning. And you should be able to have some room for transformation, evolution within that positioning without losing your core values of that. Because yes, if you are too narrow and you suddenly change your spots and you have the same company name, but you're selling a different product in all your messages, then any equity you've established in people's minds around that has been lost. So yeah, you have to be thinking about that, which is why any exercise in developing positioning for a business has to be with the key stakeholders, understanding the vision for where that company, that brand, that product or service wants to go so that you are positioning something in a way that can be sustainable.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Which is not always easy, right? It's not always easy. If you have to pivot and blow it up, then well, sometimes I guess that happens. But consistency matters. Remember when Tylenol poisoned somebody and people died, and it took about 4 months before they were back on the shelf and selling just as much product. That's because they had such strong equity that they could overcome something as traumatic as that. So yeah. So
Looks like Francis, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, Francis. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm interested to think about or to ask you about have there ever been times when you've gone into a business and they're asking you for a change and a pivot, but actually what they need is to execute better on what they already have. And I just wonder how we, as founders and business owners, how do we assess that? Because sometimes there's a temptation, right? Oh, I've got to be new. I've got to rebrand. I've got to do this. Where does that flex point sit between digging into what you have versus really a need for a pivot?
Anytime I engage with a company to do this kind of work, there's a pretty comprehensive discovery process that happens at the beginning, and usually you can figure that out. Most of the time, people haven't done this work properly from the beginning. Because again, if you do this work properly from the beginning, you should be set for a while and should be able to run with it. And so usually it's, you don't see a case where the problem is in execution. It's usually that they haven't done the foundational strategic thinking. They haven't really defined their core positioning. They don't know how to align their organization. So a lot of times people will go in, especially fractional salespeople will go in and say, oh, you don't have a playbook. Nobody knows what to say. I'm going to get them all buttoned up. But really that's indicative of not having a core strategic foundation and messaging architecture defined from the beginning that gives salespeople a unified position and voice in the marketplace. So all of this stuff directly affects operations. There's no question about it. So each situation is different, Francis. All right, let's keep going. Understanding it from a leadership and operating philosophy. So this is what this half will be about. And this is always a hard thing. Brand in my company's name is problematic for me because people go, oh, you're a marketing company, you design logos. And, I don't do any of that stuff. We are strategists. And brand, from what we've talked about, should be clear that it is a strategic construct before it is any kind of execution or tactic or color or logo or design. It's all the strategic thinking that connects to intangibles that need to align with your market and your audience. That's what brand is. And so if somebody says, oh, here's my brand, and they show you the logo, that's not showing you their brand, that's showing you their logo. The biggest thing I can give everybody is to remember that, brand and business is the same thing. Everybody has a brand. And the question is, have you strategically laid the foundation for it so you can scale? And the only way this happens is by leadership who understands this philosophy and make sure that they have been part of this thinking on all their people. I don't care how big your startup is. Everybody's got to be aligned around the same philosophy. And that brand strategy is servant first and foremost to the business strategy. So nothing happens in brand development and positioning without a clear understanding of business goals, business objectives, stakeholder requirements, where this is going, how it's being funded, how you intend to scale. Do you intend to exit? Do you intend to flip? Do you intend to organically grow? All these things impact this stuff. So first and foremost, brand is servant to the business strategy. So that means that this is a philosophical discussion as much as it is anything else. How you run your business. A lot of people, and I see this all the time, even in private equity, where you go in and say, look, we can help your portfolio companies grow and scale and increase in value, but you need to be brand centric and invest in building brand strength, because that's one of the three stools of value creation. And they go, well, what's the difference if I invest in that or not invest in that? And you immediately know that they don't understand, because it's not about a line item expense. It's not about spending more money. It's about how you run your business. It's a philosophical approach for every business decision you make that, to your point, Michael, creates consistency and alignment in everything that the business does. And if you do that effectively and you teach your people how to do that, you extend that through the enterprise, that's how you become both high performing, because it drives market performance, and high value, because people want to invest in and or acquire those kinds of business that have those attributes. Culture, how does it impact culture? So everything happens from stakeholders down to the C-suite, down to management, down to employees who push this stuff into the marketplace. So again, back to alignment and consistency. Everybody's got to be singing from the same song sheet, understand the same value proposition for the brand, get it, be aligned with it. If you do that well, everybody's unified as a community. And if you do that inside your enterprise, your people will be happier. And it's statistically proven that you build that kind of aligned and consistent culture, your employees will be more engaged, you'll have higher employee retention, higher satisfaction, and higher employee productivity. So a lot of people don't really think about the internal impact of building brand, but it's equally as powerful as what happens in the marketplace. In fact, those are the people that drive the success in the marketplace. Everybody with me? Yeah, okay. So in the private equity world, for the last 50 years, it's primarily been financial engineering and operational improvements that have been the cornerstone of value creation. The typical hold cycle is about 5 years. The goal is to acquire a company in my fund, do whatever kind of financial engineering that I can do that makes the books run better, convert debt to equity, whatever they need to do, operational improvements. How do I create efficiencies? How do I do roll-ups and consolidate backends and infrastructure? And nobody really focused on brand strength optimization and building the intangible equity. And those really revolve around identifying market opportunity, making sure you're aligned to something that clearly scales. What's the attributes that we talked about, all those intangible attributes, how well are those defined, how strong are they, and how well is that stuff aligned across all my core constituents? And really that's the premise for evaluating brand equity strength. And if a private equity company is focusing on those things at the same time, that's how you maximize your negotiating leverage and goodwill when it's time to flip a business. That kind of stuff, as we mentioned earlier, can reduce risk profile, can increase perceived likelihood of future success, and can change a 10x to a 15x when it's time to sell a business. It has that much leverage and that much power. A good example of that is there's a company in Brooklyn called Bullish, and they are a venture capital company that was formed with a brand marketing company at the same time. And they were some pioneers in this stuff, and they knew that if I'm going to build value for my limited partners, we're not just going to acquire these businesses and look at financial stuff and operational stuff. We're going to build brands. And they were the first investors in Warby Parker and Peloton and Casper mattresses. And they built brands. And those brands went public and they were on TV and they understood the power of emotional connections. And they made a lot of money. A lot of people made a lot of money. Because they understood this formula for value creation. So when we work with private equity and venture, we represent the third leg in that value creation stool. So there's the financial engineering, there's the operational improvements, and there's, building brand strength. So you were talking a little bit about how that chain works, Brian. This is how alignment happens across the enterprise. So it is leadership's responsibility to push these values and these attributes and the positioning of this business in a memorable and clearly delivered way to the people in the business. And they've got to get it. The employees really, in most true marketing terms, are your first marketing constituent. And if you're running a business and you're not considering your employees as a core constituent, you're not a good leader, right? They are the first people you need to market to. They're the first people that need to be your advocate. And they've got to be aligned in purpose, everybody in the entire organization, because these are the people that interface with your market, that need to pass those messages on. And if you do that right, and you do that with consistency, and you do that with emotional connections on top of features and benefits, and I repeat again, you got to have a good product and service. That's a prerequisite. But if you do that right and you build those connections, you build advocates. And if you're a tech company and you're building a SaaS product, there's nothing that you want more than advocates, because you are trying to get recurring revenue. You want lifetime value. And if you can do that, that's equity. And a lot of that is built on the intangibles.
So Lyle, how much of that is then, because you're building messaging initially for, again, I'm making assumptions here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but you have, here's the problem we've identified, here's the product or solution that we're going to that. Now we're going to create the messaging around why product X or service X fixes that. And so how much of the messaging truly, like you said, needs to be different between, and again, some people might just be solopreneurs and they might be consultants and they might just have a small team of, the 3 founders or whatever. So how different is that messaging? Is it where, okay, you have very clear messaging to the customer, your team internally understands it, they get the buy-in, or do you sell the messaging to your team and then take it out to your customer, right? Like, is it one and the same, or do you have to really
it's one and the same, Brian. You are teaching them along the way that this is our messaging hierarchy. This is how we communicate with the market. This is what you say. These are our values. Here's the brand narrative. Let me put it in a consumer facing story so that you can see how this plays. It's all got to be one thing. You don't want different elements for different groups. Everybody is connected to the same language. So
Right.
There's no
Perfect.
differences.
Thank you.
Yeah, messaging also is, a lot of people try to be too many things to too many people. They try to say too much, and we don't really absorb messaging that way. Messaging, again, is hierarchical, and the idea is that you lead people through an information process by how you structure your messaging. Positioning is at the top. The idea is that positioning is such a compelling hook that you say, that's unbelievable. Tell me more. How do you do that? And messaging flows down in detail. It never starts with detail because we can't retain all that. So that's what happens at the highest level of positioning. And positioning doesn't always have to be connected directly to features and benefits. It can be emotional attributes that are at the top of your positioning. And it really depends on the market and how you need to differentiate. Consistency and all that stuff, Brian, what you tell your people inside is what they got to tell the people outside. And so, yeah, keep it all consistent. So when you think about it from a leadership perspective, consistency means that as I think about every point of engagement with my people, with my market, from call centers to my salespeople to what happens when people go to an event or an experience, or what happens in retail at point of sale, all these things need to be executed under the same vision with the same understanding so that there's as much consistency and alignment as possible at every point of brand touch. So a great example, the most obvious example, is take Apple. Whether you go into their stores and how you experience those stores, or the Genius Bar, or the unboxing experience, or the beauty of their hardware design, or the simplicity of their operating systems, the consistency and alignment around their brand experience is phenomenal. And if you look at their valuation, over 35% of their app value on stock is attributed to intangible equity, most of which is its brand. I mean, you're talking about $1.4 trillion of value, something ridiculous, is attributed to stuff that is not easily measured on a P&L. You can see that delta in capital markets because there's a delta between book value and cap value. Very hard to see that in private companies, right? Because you don't have that data, but it's very real. So alignment, again, so critical. Aligned with and committed to every part of that positioning, and it requires unwavering consistency. And the employees are your first constituency. They are your first market.
Hey, Lyle, I know
Yeah.
Apple spends, a fortune in everything they do, but I get a feeling when I go into my local Trader Joe's that I actually just want to work there. I like it so much. Like, all the people are so nice, but I don't ever see a commercial, anything. It's just sort of embedded in their culture.
Yeah, but think about the consistency with which that brand is presented. You walk into any Trader Joe's, it's got the same hand-painted signs, the same local stuff. Oh, welcome to the Upper West Side Trader Joe's. I mean, it's the same vibe, the same feel. The people are the same. The values are the same. The way they treat customers are the same. It's just a different positioning. It's just different thing than Apple. But Trader Joe's is a brilliant brand example. And talk about consistency.
The thing that appeals to me is the diversity of everyone working there, from 20 years old to 80 years old. Like, and they're all super nice and kind of like them walking you to every, like you say, where's something, they walk you to the product. The whole, I really like the store.
But that's connected to values. And so when people started Trader Joe's, I guarantee you they sat down and said, who are we? What are our values? How do we treat customers? How do we treat our employees? And, you know, since that day one, they haven't wavered. Same thing, same experience. It's a great example. So we're going to get deep into the positioning process in the next session. But to give you a taste, you know, this is really where positioning happens. It's really starting with, and this is a little bit geared towards, you know, early stage people. So, you know, you, the stakeholder, you, the person building a business, you can't really establish a positioning without having a clear sense of what it is you want to build. What kind of company do you want to build? What's your vision? Not just your product or service. What kind of business do you want to grow? Do you want something that you want to scale long term? Are you positioning something so that you could be acquired? I mean, all these things have to be considered before you define your positioning. That informs your business objectives that you can do with some clarity. And when you get to that place, you can say, okay, now I can identify where clear market opportunity exists and where there is competitive white space where I can take this vision and actually there's room for me to scale. And if you go through that process, you then are in a position where you can define core positioning. And with that core positioning established, you now can do business and brand strategy and then push that out to execution. So Brian, to your earlier question, that's kind of the linear steps that you go through to get that. And that's why positioning is so foundational. And it's tricky because a lot of people struggle because positioning makes them make choices to be single-minded, and they struggle. Well, I'm so much more than that. I can do more than that. But if you try to be all things to all people in a core positioning, you become nothing to everybody because they can't retain that. They can't remember that. So that's why this process is so foundational. And both Trader Joe's and Apple are perfect examples of having made those choices early on and never wavered. And you know, everybody, sometimes people go, wow, those are huge companies. Well, you know, how can I do the same? It doesn't matter how big you are or what space you're in. The strategic philosophy is exactly the same. So I mean, keep that in mind, that this process is equally as valuable regardless of how big you are, B2B, B2C, or what category. It just doesn't. So when you think of consistency alignment, you are thinking of it across every point of touch. Digital experiences, your Marcom work, any kind of customer experiences through sales, customer relationship management, all your social media presence, all your internal stuff with management and employees, cultures, values, all these things are a direct reflection of your positioning, because your positioning is a direct relationship to the people that you're trying to sell to. So that while brand has such creative connotations in people's minds, brand is actually backfits directly into business strategy and how you want to make money. So I'm not embarrassed to say that this is a manipulative process. Yes, it is creative and it is intangible, but it is designed to move markets. It's designed to move minds and people. It's designed to set a business up to drive revenue. So yes, it's creative, and the creative expression is part of this whole thing. But for me, that's what makes my work different than a lot of other consultancies. We blend that creative side of understanding how to build equity with the pragmatic side of business. And that, my personal belief is, that's how you maximize business performance and wealth creation potential, by bringing these two things together. So every brand decision is a business decision first. And I know I keep pounding this because people think, branding is all about colors, fonts, and logos, and it's not. It eventually becomes part of that, but that's just what they call brand extension. That's an element of extending my brand into execution. So it's a business decision first. What you build, your products of service, the user experience that you're creating, how you do your customer relationship management, your values and your props, everything, all these things, what you believe, how you look, say, and feel, all this stuff is directly designed to appeal to and leverage your obtainable market. So, which is why that foundational stuff about, what is my obtainable market? Is it scalable? Is it big enough that I can scale this business that aligns with my objective on a business level? Do I have competitive white space where I have a point of differentiation that makes me unique? Because I want to build that into my positioning. And then from there, every decision you make around your brand experience is designed to manipulate your audience. Makes sense, right? When you think of it this way.
I got a quick question, Lyle. Do you think that a really good brand, but a particularly bad product, the good brand can still carry the bad product? And the reason why I ask this is because I recently had the founder of Spot and Tango, which is a pet food brand. It's a healthy wellness pet food brand. And it used to be called Brewer Foods or something like that before they rebranded to Spot and Tango. But it was a really, really good product, but the brand wasn't really aligned. And once they switched over to Spot and Tango, that's when the business went from, a couple million in revenue to hundreds of millions in revenue from that brand reset. So can a really good brand carry a really horrible product?
Data will show you that a strong brand that builds a strong emotional connection with an audience can overcome weaknesses in product. My personal feeling is that's not sustainable, but yes, there are examples in history where strong brands have carried products that were not considered as good as a competitor.
Well,
That can happen. That's because people value relationships, and if I feel good and I have an affinity with the brand, I'm willing to sacrifice something. Maybe it's not always conscious, but yeah, it can happen that way.
Well, my question is how does that change into? I know we've only got 5 minutes left here, but with influencers, right? Influencer marketing and all of this stuff, right? You're kind of seeing this rise of not just affiliate marketing, right? Where, and not to say that Mr. Beast's products aren't good, but you start with an enormous brand, right? And then you layer on products on top of that, right? Beast chocolate, Beast chips, or whatever. And so with the rise of influencers versus, where almost everyone is kind of building and leveraging their personal brand, how is that kind of impacted brand with the traditional hierarchy of how companies look at it, where like Coca-Cola, where they spent centuries, right, or years and years building this, versus an influencer X with 5 million followers building this, hey, I just dropped this new makeup kit, this new something like that, right?
Yeah, well, every influencer who works with a brand is going to be given brand attributes and guidelines that they hope they follow, but you're not really hiring an influencer to do your branding. You're hiring an influencer to create awareness across their follower base.
Well,
so,
and I apologize. I meant for the influencers that start their own brands, like for Mr. Beast, where that's his. Oh, he
can pull that off because he's got that kind of clout. I mean, look at what Kylie Jenner built. Oh my God, So yeah, but all of those are based on emotional brand connections. They started with that first.
Mm-hmm.
So what slide am I on here? I got a few more, so we don't have much time. Let me try to blow through some of the stuff. So remember that anything about brand is strategy before tactics. And anybody who comes to you and says, oh, I'm starting a company, design my logo, shoot them right there, because that's ass backwards. It's strategy before tactics. Strategic development is both pragmatic and creative. So, and that's important to remember too, because sometimes differentiated positioning is not about a feature and benefit. It's about an emotional connection, or it's another kind of point of difference. And how you say these things, and how you write these words, and how you show images, all these things matter. So to think that you can separate creativity from the strategic development process, in my humble opinion, is a mistake. It's a market-driven approach before it's copy, a color, a tagline, or any kind of thing like that. And anything you do going forward in product design, or development, research and development, has to align with that core positioning. Otherwise, you're at a place where you pivot, and you're risking sacrificing any awareness your brand has built in the marketplace already. So I know this is redundant, but your brand and your business are one and the same. And if you want to be an effective leader and grow a company with value, consider them to be the same thing. So as we get to the end here, building brand equity is a leadership responsibility, not a line item expense. And that's something that a lot of people don't get. It is a way of doing business in an operating best practice. All right? Everything about your business is expressed in your culture and in your values. And I'm not making this up. You can go through decades of data. A differentiated brand is your single most valuable asset that you have as a business. Right? If I have a killer brand, I can roll out products, I can cross-sell, and I upsell, because I've got all this equity in my brand, and I already have emotional connections and relationships with people. And the value of that is indescribable. And Warren understood this. Brand equity is the single biggest factor in determining the value of a business. Spoken from a guy who's worth about $148 billion. So it's the real deal. But it's soft, it's squishy, it's not tangible, it's not easy to measure. And that's why it's oftentimes an uphill battle getting leadership to understand this. So the clients I vibe best with are the people that philosophically understand this stuff. And the rest of the time I'm trying to teach. And sometimes that's like pounding your head against the wall. The biggest value I can give to you guys is if you think early about this stuff when you're founding a company. And when I help clients be investor ready to raise money, building that brand foundation and that positioning is the beginning of the entire process. We don't write strategic plans, we don't do pitch decks, we don't do anything until that foundation is laid. And so the earlier you do this as a founder of an early stage business, the better you're going to be and the more success you're going to have. And the more you're going to manipulate investors to give you money, to open their wallets. So, and really that's what this is all about at the end of the day, right? The takeaway, be brand centric. So we got a couple minutes. Any thoughts, questions, anything before we're done?
Lyle,
Nope.
I got a quick question here. I know we only got a minute here. What about pricing in terms of branding? So like Apple, for example, is a really premium, they have a $1,000 phone or whatever. Like in your early pricing for say like a product or service, how important is that pricing? Do you want to start on the high end or low end? Can you go back to high and low? Like how about the pricing?
Yeah, pricing strategy is a really important piece of the equation. And you really can't vacillate. And if you choose a positioning, say, we are a premium high-end product, then the last thing you want to do is be a discounter. Because discounting creates a different kind of perception, and it's hard to undiscount if people begin to expect that. So yeah, pricing is an important element in your positioning, and that really just falls right back to the beginning. Who are you? What is your positioning in the market? Are you low market, mid market, high end? How do you want to be perceived? Oftentimes, psychoscience will tell you that higher price has a perception of higher value and higher quality. And sometimes the inclination is, oh, I can move the needle on my P&L by discounting. And that's a very short-sighted, dangerous brand decision to make. So yeah, always connect brand to pricing decisions for sure.
Cool.
Amazing. Well, I know we had a few other people that weren't able to make it that asked some questions, but I'll make sure to have them message it in the circle group. Lyle, are you able to share this presentation out as well after in the?
Yeah, I'll send it to Elena, who handles everything. So
Perfect. Amazing.
And I'll send the PDF over. And the next third session is on the 18th of March, and we'll really go over how this relates to product market fit and positioning and alignment, how you actually create that positioning statement as the beginning of the process. And that will be valuable. I'll provide a template for how that happens. And we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you, Lyle, so much for this. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and engagement, and excited for the third session to kind of bring it all home, but a lot of work to do in between that. So
yeah, thank you all for coming. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you all.
All right.
Thanks, Lyle.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.